I want to tell you a story the way stories are meant to be told, not with facts lined up like soldiers, not with lessons announced before they are earned, but with a quiet voice that walks beside you and lets meaning reveal itself slowly. Imagine a road that curves away from the city, where buildings loosen their grip and the air remembers how to breathe. Imagine late afternoon light, the kind that turns ordinary dust into something golden. On that road, a car that was built to outrun almost everything stands still, its paint shining, its engine silent, its confidence gone. Power, wealth, speed, prestige, none of them are moving an inch. And beside that car, not far from where the road meets a stretch of grass, stands a child with scuffed shoes and curious eyes, holding the kind of certainty that does not come from money, but from love. The child does not arrive with drama. No music swells, no one notices at first. She is small enough to be overlooked, the way the most important things often are. She stops because she has been taught to stop when someone looks lost. She stops because stopping is what kindness does before it asks permission. She tilts her head, studies the quiet machine, and then looks at the person standing there, shoulders stiff with a worry that has no place to go. The problem is complicated. The solution, in the adult world, would involve phones, technicians, time, and a certain amount of pride being swallowed. But the child does not live in that world yet. She lives in a place where broken things are not embarrassing, only temporary. In a voice meant for secrets and promises, she speaks words that carry no weight and yet somehow lift everything. My dad can fix it. There is no sales pitch in that sentence, no resume, no guarantee beyond trust. She does not say how long it will take or how much it will cost. She does not say what is broken or why it matters. She simply offers a bridge from stuck to moving, from worry to hope. And she whispers, not because the world is loud, but because faith does not need to shout. The person by the car hesitates, not because the offer is unclear, but because it is unfamiliar. Life has taught this person that help usually comes with strings, that solutions arrive after negotiations, that nothing is free unless it is worthless. And yet here is a child, standing where professionals would never think to stand, offering a solution that costs nothing but trust. The road is quiet, the moment stretches. Somewhere inside, a voice that has been ignored for years clears its throat and says, maybe. They walk together, the child leading, because leadership does not always announce itself with authority. Sometimes it just starts walking and assumes others will follow. They leave behind the polished car and move toward a house that does not impress the sky. The fence leans a little. The paint has known better days. The yard is a map of effort rather than perfection. This is not a place designed to be admired. It is designed to be lived in. Each step toward it feels like a step away from a world where worth is measured and toward one where worth is assumed. Inside, hands that have fixed many things listen to the story. There is no laughter at the expensive car's silence, no satisfaction in another person's inconvenience. There is only attention, real attention, the kind that treats every problem as human before it treats it as mechanical. Tools are gathered, not as weapons against failure, but as companions in patience. The work begins, not hurried, not grand, but careful. The kind of careful that comes from knowing that fixing something is not about showing skill, but about restoring trust. While the work continues, the child sits nearby, feet swinging, watching a world align itself with her expectations. This is how it has always been for her. When something breaks, someone tries. When someone struggles, someone else notices. She does not know that this is remarkable. She thinks it is normal. And perhaps that is the most remarkable thing of all. She does not yet know about the other world, the one that scrolls past suffering, the one that locks its doors and windows and calls it safety. She only knows the world she has been shown, where helping is as natural as breathing. The car eventually speaks again, its silence replaced by a sound that feels almost grateful. Relief settles into the air, not loudly, but like a sigh you didn't realize you were holding. Gratitude tries to find a shape big enough to match the moment, but it struggles, because gratitude measured in numbers feels clumsy here. There is an offer made, generous by any standard that can be counted. It is refused, not with pride, but with simplicity. The work was needed, the hands were able. That is enough. Something shifts then, and it is not the car. It is something quieter, deeper, more lasting. A realization settles in that all the resources in the world cannot replace the power of being seen. That wealth can buy solutions, but it cannot buy the innocence that believes solutions should be shared. Standing in that modest yard, it becomes clear that success has been measured incorrectly for a long time. That perhaps the true measure is not what you accumulate, but what you are willing to give without keeping score. When it is time to leave, the child waves as if nothing extraordinary has happened. Because to her, nothing has. She has simply lived according to the rules she was taught, rules written not on paper but in action. Be kind, pay attention, trust that helping matters even if no one is watching. The car drives away, but something else stays behind, something heavier than metal and yet light enough to carry forever. I tell you this story not because it is rare, but because it is overlooked, because every day opportunities like this pass us by disguised as interruptions. A stranger's problem, a delay, a moment that asks us to step outside our schedule. We have trained ourselves to admire speed and independence so much that we forget how powerful interdependence can be. We celebrate those who need no one and quietly shame those who ask for help. But here, on a quiet road, a child reminds us that needing help is not failure. Refusing to offer it might be. Think about how different the world would feel if we spoke with the same confidence that child did. Not confidence in ourselves alone, but confidence in one another. We can fix this, not because we are experts, not because we have all the answers, but because we are willing to try together. Imagine communities where problems are not passed upward or downward, but held in common. Imagine leaders who listen before they command, who understand that authority grows stronger when it kneels beside a problem rather than towering over it. The story lingers because it challenges us. It asks uncomfortable questions without raising its voice. When was the last time we stopped for someone else's stalled moment? When did we decide that kindness was optional, or worse, inefficient? How often do we drive past, convincing ourselves that someone else will take care of it, that our contribution would be too small to matter? And yet the smallest voice on that road changed everything. There is a quiet revolution hidden in that whisper, a reminder that solutions do not always come from the highest places, but often from the humblest ones. That wisdom can live in a child's certainty, that fixing what is broken is not just about machines or systems, but about the spaces between people. Every act of kindness repairs something invisible but essential. Trust, hope, the belief that we are not alone. As we move through our lives surrounded by speed and noise and the constant pressure to prove ourselves, we might remember that road, that stalled moment, that small figure standing without hesitation. We might remember that progress is not always forward motion, and that sometimes the most important movement is toward one another. We might learn to listen for whispers instead of waiting for alarms, because somewhere, right now, something is broken, not always loudly, not always obviously, and somewhere nearby, someone has the ability to help, even if they do not yet realize it. The question is not whether the problem is worthy, or whether the helper is impressive enough. The question is whether we will stop long enough to let kindness introduce itself. And so this story keeps walking with us, step by step, refusing to settle into a neat ending. It stays unfinished on purpose, because it is meant to continue every time we choose to believe that fixing things is not reserved for the powerful, the wealthy, or the recognized, but is available to anyone willing to whisper hope into a stalled moment and mean it. The longer that whisper echoes, the more it reshapes the way we hear the world. It begins to soften the sharp edges of certainty we carry, the kind that insists we already know how things work and who belongs where. It asks us to reconsider how often we confuse importance with volume, value with visibility, because moment on the road did not announce itself to the news, did not trend, did not leave a plaque behind. And yet it did something quieter and more enduring. It rearranged the inner furniture of a life that had grown accustomed to standing alone. After that day, ordinary scenes begin to look different. A cracked sidewalk becomes evidence of neglect or care, depending on who notices it. A tired cashier becomes a person with a story instead of an obstacle in a line. A neighbor's flickering light becomes an invitation rather than a nuisance. Once you have seen how easily help can appear, you start noticing how often it doesn't, and that awareness becomes a kind of responsibility, not a burden, but a gentle nudge that says, you can do something here, even if it's small. Small is a word we underestimate. We use it to dismiss, to minimize, to delay action, until something feels big enough to justify our effort. But the child on that road did not measure the size of her contribution. She did not ask whether her words would be enough. She spoke them anyway, and in doing so, she proved that small acts, when rooted in sincerity, have a way of expanding beyond their original shape. They stretch into places we never intended them to reach. Consider how many times people carry their broken moments quietly, hoping no one notices. Pride teaches us to hide the stalled parts of our lives, to smile through malfunction. We polish the exterior and keep the engine trouble to ourselves. And so we pass one another every day, surrounded by invisible breakdowns, each assuming the other is fine. Kindness interrupts that illusion. It notices the stalled look, the pause that lasts a little too long, the silence that weighs more than it should. It does not demand disclosure, but it makes space for it. That space is rare. It is not efficient. It cannot be optimized. It requires patience and pati. Hence is a currency many believe they cannot afford. And yet, when patience is offered freely, it multiplies. Time spent helping does not vanish. It transforms. It becomes memory, meaning, a recalibration of priorities. It teaches us that not everything valuable can be scheduled or scaled. There is also humility in accepting help, a humility that can be more challenging than giving it. Standing beside something you thought you controlled, now helpless, forces a reckoning. It asks you to confront the limits of self-sufficiency, and when help comes from an unexpected place, it dismantles hierarchies we cling to for comfort. It reminds us that capability is not owned by status, and wisdom does not require permission. The road where this story began has seen many travelers since. Most of them pass through unaware of what once happened there, just as we pass through places layered with histories we will never know. That is how kindness often works. It leaves no signposts. It does not demand remembrance. It trusts that its influence will travel invisibly, carried forward in choices not yet made. Perhaps that influence shows up when someone chooses to pull over instead of honk, when someone listens instead of correcting, when someone offers reassurance without first calculating the return. Perhaps it shows up in moments that feel unrelated, like a decision to mentor without recognition, or to forgive without an apology, or to share without excess. The original act dissolves into 1,000 reflections, each one altered slightly by circumstance, but all carrying the same quiet intention. There is a temptation to romanticize such stories, to frame them as exceptions that prove the rule of indifference. But doing so lets us off the hook. It allows us to admire kindness without practicing it. The truth is less comfortable and more hopeful. At the same time, these moments are available to us constantly. They are not rare because people are incapable, but because people are distracted. We are looking ahead instead of beside us. We are planning instead of noticing. What if we treated attention as a form of generosity? What if noticing became an act of courage? In a world that rewards speed, slowing down feels rebellious. In a culture that prizes certainty, admitting you don't have all the answers feels risky. And yet, those are precisely the conditions that make genuine connection possible. When we slow down, we allow room for others to enter our awareness. When we admit uncertainty, we invite collaboration. The child did not know what part needed fixing or how long it would take. She simply knew someone who could try. That belief that trying is worthwhile even without guarantees is something many of us unlearn over time. We become cautious, strategic, afraid of failure or embarrassment. We forget that most meaningful efforts begin without assurance of success. They begin with willingness. Willingness is a quiet strength. It does not posture or perform. It does not require applause. It shows up again and again, often unnoticed. And over time, it shapes character. A person who is willing to help becomes someone others trust. A community that is willing to pause becomes one where people feel safer to falter. A society that values willingness over perfection becomes more resilient, more humane. There is also an element of joy that rarely gets mentioned. Helping, when stripped of obligation and expectation, carries a lightness that is hard to replicate. It reconnects us with our shared humanity. It reminds us that we are part of something larger than our individual ambitions. That joy is not loud or flashy. It is steady. It sustains rather than excites. And in a world exhausted by constant stimulation, that kind of joy is revolutionary. As the memory of that day continues to unfold, it challenges the stories we tell ourselves about success. It asks whether success can include stopping, whether achievement can include tending to someone else's need, whether progress might sometimes look like turning around instead of pushing forward. These questions do not demand immediate answers. They simply linger, reshaping our definitions over time. The whisper also reframes power. Power, we often think, is the ability to control outcomes, to avoid dependence, to command resources. But there is another kind of power, quieter and more enduring, the power to connect, to reassure, to mobilize goodwill. The child exercised that power effortlessly, not because she sought it, but because she trusted the bonds around her. She believed in people, and belief, when given freely, becomes contagious. It is easy to underestimate the cumulative effect of such belief. One person feels seen and carries that awareness into their next interaction. They respond with more patience, more openness. That response alters someone else's day, who then passes along a softened edge, a gentler tone. Over time, these subtle shifts accumulate, like water shaping stone. No single moment claims credit, but the landscape changes all the same. We often ask what the world needs more of, as if the answer must be complex or grand. More innovation, more leadership, more resources, but perhaps what it needs is simpler and more demanding at the same time. More people willing to whisper hope into uncertain moments. More people willing to believe that help is not a weakness, and offering it is not naive. More people willing to trust that goodness, though quiet, is not fragile. There is risk, of course. Kindness makes us vulnerable. It opens us to rejection, misunderstanding, even exploitation. But the absence of kindness carries its own risk: isolation, hardness, a gradual erosion of empathy. The choice is not between safety and kindness, but between different kinds of exposure. One exposes us to disappointment. The other exposes us to loneliness. Standing on that road, none of these calculations were made. There was no weighing of pros and cons, no risk assessment. There was only a moment and a response shaped by how a child had been taught to see the world. That simplicity is not ignorance, it is clarity. It cuts through the noise of self-protection and asks a single question: can I help? We do not need to return to childhood to answer that question. We simply need to remember what we already know but have learned to ignore: that most people are doing the best they can with what they have. That everyone at some point will stand beside something they cannot fix alone. That dignity is preserved not by pretending we don't need one another, but by responding with respect when we do. As the story continues to ripple outward, it becomes less about a single event and more about an invitation to live with softer eyes and steadier hands, to measure wealth not only by what we accumulate, but by what we are willing to share, to understand that the true luxury is not independence, but connection. And perhaps, without realizing it, we begin to change how we speak. Our words become less guarded, more generous. We offer reassurance without irony. We say things like, "Let's figure this out," instead of, "That's not my problem." We stop whispering hope only to children and start whispering it to one another, trusting that adults need it just as much. The road stretches on as roads do, carrying countless stories we will never hear. But this one stays with us because it asks something of us without demanding it. It does not instruct or scold. It simply shows what is possible when kindness is treated not as an exception, but as a starting point. And as long as we keep listening to that quiet echo, the story keeps unfolding, finding new voices, new moments, new stalled places, waiting not for perfection, but for someone willing to stop.